the well and watered his uncle's sheep. And then Jacob kissed Rachel and began to weep aloud. He told Rachel that he was a relative of her father and a son of Rebekah, so she ran and told her father. As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he hurried to meet him. He embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his home. And there Jacob told him all these things. And then Laban said to him, "You are my own flesh and blood." So Jacob sees Rachel coming. Rachel is coming along the way, and he ends up becoming welcomed by his family, by his extended family. Has anyone ever read this and thought it was just weird that Jacob goes up and just kisses Rachel? Yeah, I did this week. If customarily, though, that's actually pretty accurate. You're going to see here when Laban meets Jacob that they're going to greet each other with a kiss also. So this is not a romantic thing that Jacob is doing to Rachel. It's just their family, and when you haven't seen, in Hebrew culture, when you haven't seen your family for a long time, you greet each other with a kiss. So that's what Jacob is doing here with Rachel. But we kind of get this idea that Jacob is already kind of wanting to impress Rachel in this passage, in this section, because it's not the shepherds that roll the stone away to feed to water the sheep. It's Jacob. And more than likely, this stone was a real big stone. More than likely, this was a feat of strength for him to be able to move this stone to water the sheep. And the reason why that would have been that way is so that one person couldn't have control of the well. They wanted to make it so that all the shepherds had to come together, work together to remove the stone, and that way then everyone had to share the water, because water is a valuable resource in this section of the world. And so, more than likely, the stone was a very big stone, and Jacob, wanting to impress Rachel, he moves the stone away himself and does the watering himself. And so he tells Rachel that he is Rebekah's son, that he's come to their family, and Rachel just takes off to go tell Laban about this. And we're going to see Laban is going to be a pretty crafty little character for a while in Jacob's life. And we thought Jacob was a swindler. No, Laban's even worse. So we're going to finish reading the rest of the section here. It's going to be verses 14 through 30. It'll be a little chunk. It says, after Jacob had stayed with him for a whole month, Laban said to him, "Just because you are a relative of mine, should you work for me for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be." Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes, but Rachel had a lovely figure and was beautiful. And Jacob was in love with Rachel and said, "I'll work for you 7 years in return for your younger daughter Rachel." Laban said, "It's better that I give her to you than to some other man. Stay here with me." So Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel, but they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. And Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife. My time is completed, and I want to make love to her." So Laban brought together all the people of the place and gave a feast. But when evening came, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob. And Jacob made love to her. And Laban gave his servant Zilpah to his daughter as her attendant. And when morning came, there was Leah. So Jacob said to Laban, "What is this that you have done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me?" And Laban replied, "It is not our custom here to give you the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. Finish this daughter's bridal week. Then we will give you the youngest one also, in return for another 7 years of work." And Jacob did so. He finished the week with Leah, and then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife, and Laban gave his servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as her attendant, and Jacob made love to Rachel also, and his love for Rachel was greater than his love for Leah, and he worked for Laban another 7 years. Like I said, Jacob's met his match in Laban. There are multiple things going on here. Laban is working overtime to accomplish certain things that he wants at the behest of Jacob, at his detriment. So Laban expresses a desire to pay Jacob. The relationship here is weird. Jacob's not just a hired hand, and he's not a slave. He's a member of the family. And so he can't just work for free, and you can't just pay him like you would pay a hired hand. And so they have a conversation like, "Hey, what do you want to work for?" My guess is, after being there for a month, Laban's picked up that Jacob really likes Rachel. And probably already knew what Jacob was going to want. And unlike before, so if this story seems familiar, if we go back to Isaac's time, when Abraham sends his servant to the same area, potentially to the same well, and he sends his servant here, and they find Rebekah at the well, and Rebekah runs off to Laban, to her brother. Laban remembered that when Abraham's servant came, Abraham's servant came, there was lots of money involved. They gave quite a large sum of money to pay the bridal price for Rebekah. Laban's no dummy, but this one's different. Jacob comes penniless. He has nothing with him. So what can Laban get out of Jacob for Rachel? Work. 7 years of work. And based on what we understand bride prices to be at this time, Jacob's proposal to work 7 years for free is a pretty good bride price. Andrew Simon writes, Laban appears to accept Jacob's generous proposal. Indeed, during this era, a laborer's wages vary between 1/2 to 1 shekel per month. So Jacob was offering labor worth between 42 and 84 shekels. And since the Mosaic law appears to set the minimum bride price, or the maximum bride price at 50 shekels, Jacob's offer was more than generous. More than likely, he's giving above what God's going to say in the future needs to be the maximum bride price. In today's money, if it makes it a little easier, if shekels aren't your thing and you don't really know how to translate shekels to US dollars, I did that for you. If a full-time employee made $12 an hour and worked 40 hours a week, Jacob's bride price in today's money would be about $174,000. That's how much he's willing to pay to have Rachel. So time flies for Jacob. 7 years goes by like a flash. Why? Because he loves Rachel. It's interesting to note, this is just a little side note, has nothing to do with the actual sermon, but this is one of the few marriages we see in the Old Testament that's actually based out of love. A lot of the other ones are just arranged and things like that, but this one, Jacob loves Rachel, and that's why he wants to marry her. So 7 years goes by as if no time had passed for Jacob. He just loves her that much that it was just easy work. And he now comes to Laban and says, hey, I've fulfilled my end of the bargain. You need to give me your daughter now so we can marry her. And this is where Laban's going to start to maneuver some things behind the scenes. Because what does Laban really want out of Jacob? More free labor. Free labor is great labor. It doesn't cost you anything. And he wants more free labor. And he wants to get both of his daughters married off, not just one. Because if both daughters are married off, they now become the responsibility of the husband. It's not his job to financially take care of Rachel anymore, or of Leah. And I know we look at that section where it says that Leah had weaker eyes, and some people have inferred that maybe Leah wasn't pleasant to look at. We don't think that that's probably what that means. Back then, most women wore veils that would only show their eyes. Like if you think of like Arabian movies and you see like women with veils, that's kind of what we're thinking about here. And it just means that Rachel's eyes were prettier than Leah's eyes. It doesn't mean that Leah was not a looker. It just means that Rachel had more pleasing eyes than Leah did. And because you only got to see the eyes, that was one of the things that men would look towards as a way of deciding who they wanted to be with. So Laban switches the girls. And if you're like, how did this happen? How did Jacob go in and not know the person that he was making love with? More than likely, in the Jewish feast, or wedding feast, it was 7 days. The first day was a big party. And the first day, everyone got drunk. Really drunk. And more than likely, Leah was wearing a veil also, even in the act. There's no nice way I can say this and talk about this. No, not any church way, at least. So she's wearing a veil. Jacob's really drunk, and he just doesn't understand. He just doesn't get it. He doesn't see what's happened, and so Jacob ends up with Leah. Laban, to continue to kind of manipulate things in his direction, he already gives Zilpah to Leah as his gift. It was customary for the father to give the daughter a gift, and so he gives Zilpah as his gift, a servant. Laban is doing everything he's supposed to do. All the customary things, all the things on the outside to make it look like, look, I'm doing everything right, except for the fact that he switched the daughters. And Jacob kind of just has to take it. He doesn't really have a choice here. And so if he's basically now paid 7 years for Leah, not for Rachel, and if he wants Rachel, he has to pay another 7 years. And this 7 years ain't going to be as easy as the first one. We don't see here that it says that this 7 years went by like a flash. He's going to work another 7 years for free to have the wife that he actually wanted in the first place. God promised Jacob that he would watch over him and be with him. That was God's promise back in chapter 28. So why would God allow Jacob to be treated this way? Why would God allow Jacob to be swindled the same way he swindled his brother and father? Going back to Galatians, because Jacob is reaping what he has sown. He has decided that over time he would swindle people to get the things that he wants, and now he is being treated the exact same way. Now there are things that he wants, and he is being swindled in the same way that he swindled his brother and his father. This will not be the last time that Laban and Jacob fight and quarrel. They will have a very tenuous relationship the entire time that Jacob is there. But God is not doing this just to get back at Jacob, just to punish him, just because Jacob deserves this. God is not the God that holds the magnifying glass over the ants, like we sometimes have a picture of, and the little boy holding the magnifying glass over the ants just to burn the ants. God's not doing these things just to hurt us. God has good intentions here. God disciplines the people that he cares about. And Jacob is not yet the person God wants him to be. And so God is going to discipline Jacob and treat him the same way he has treated others so that he can be molded into the person God wants him to be. And we see this talked about in Hebrews chapter 12. We're going to read a decent little chunk here. It won't be up there, so if you want to go to Hebrews 12 to follow along. If not, you can just listen. And start in verse 5. It says, "And have you completely forgotten this word of encouragement that addresses you as a father addresses his son?" It says, "My son, do not make light of the Lord's discipline, and do not lose heart when he rebukes you, because the Lord disciplines the one he loves, and he chastens everyone he accepts as his son. Endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as his children. For what children are not disciplined by their father? If you are not disciplined, and everyone undergoes discipline, then you are not legitimate, not true sons and daughters at all. Moreover, we have all had human fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them for it. How much more should we submit to the Father of spirits and live? They disciplined us for a little while as they thought best, but God disciplines us for our good, in order that we may share in his holiness. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it provides a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it." The author of Hebrews is very clear. Discipline is an important thing. In fact, if we want to know that we are legitimate sons and daughters of God, one of the factors that we know is God disciplining us and trying to mold us into the people that he wants us to be. So when we go through hardship, when we go through hard times, and God's not disciplining us always because we've done something wrong. James tells us to rejoice in our trials and tribulations, to rejoice when we go through hard times. And James, again, repeats what the author here is saying, is because those hard times turn us into the people that God wants us to be. Jacob's going to go through a hard 7 years, and he's going to have another additional 6 years on top of that. He's going to end up being in Laban's household for 20 years. We're going to talk about some of those stories. And they're not going to be easy. It's going to be difficult. But the Jacob that comes back to the land of Canaan, where he left, is going to be a very different Jacob than the one that went. And God's going to use this 20 years of hardship and difficulty to mold Jacob and to shape Jacob into the person that he wants him to be. Why? Because God disciplines the people that he cares about. He disciplines those that he loves. Because ultimately, our entire job and our entire goal is that as we go through life and as we go through hardship and as God chisels away and eats away at different parts of us, that we look more and more and more like Jesus. That's the goal. And God wants Jacob to look more and more like him. And we only, for whatever reason, we really struggle to learn lessons when things are easy. For whatever reason, we as a human people just need to go through difficult times to learn the lessons God wants to teach us. This discipline is a sign of God's love for Jacob. Putting Jacob in a place with a person that is going to be hard and difficult to work for and to be around ultimately is going to be good for Jacob. But just like the author of Hebrews writes, no discipline is fun and easy when it's happening. It's painful. It's hard. But ultimately, what we get on the other end is good because God allows us to be the people he wants us to be, and we get turned and molded into the people that reflect him. So as we go into open worship, think back to the time that you've gone through difficult circumstances. Looking back, what were the lessons you learned from that? For me, I've told this story before, but this is the first thing that I could think of when I was writing my sermon. When God had told me to no longer be youth pastor at Lynn, and I had resigned my position, I had in my head that I would just go be youth pastor somewhere else immediately. And I was looking for churches and looking at positions and even sent my resume off to a couple places. And no phone calls. Nothing happened. And it was I didn't know at the time, but it was going to be 5 years before I worked in professional ministry ever again. I was still working at Lynn. I was still serving and helping out the church. But the thing that I wanted to do, being a pastor, I was not going to be able to do. It took me about 2 or 3 years, to even begin to understand what God was trying to do during that time. And those were not an easy 2 or 3 years. There are lots of conversations I have with Nikki of, why isn't God allowing me to do this? Like, I know this is the calling that God placed in my life. Why am I not being able to serve in the way that I want to serve? And I was frustrated, and I was angry at times, and depressed at times, and I kind of went through the whole gambit of negative emotions. And then I finally figured out and began to realize why. Why I had to spend 5 years out of the ministry. Because my entire identity and who I saw myself as was a pastor, not a child of God. My worth, my reason for doing anything was to have that title of pastor. And God wanted my worth and my reason for living to be just to follow him. And I had warped this idea and warped what I wanted to kind of accept this other identity instead. But it took time away from being a pastor to learn that. And those were not easy years. It wasn't until the end when I finally, after 4.5 years, finally accepted. I was like, okay, God, if this is all that I ever do, if I never work as a pastor again, if I only help do teach and work in the church and go work a secular job during the week and stuff, if that's all I ever get to do for you, that's enough. But it took 4.5 years to get to that point. And after a couple months of living in that contented spirit, that contentment, that's when God's like, okay, now it's time to go back. But I was fully prepared to not. Because God had been able to mold me and work on me to turn me into the person